Hey dreamers, tonight we step into legend together. As night gently settles and the world grows quiet, imagine that you stand on the shoreline of ancient Greece. Crystalline waves whisper to golden sands beneath a twilight sky, and each breath carries the scent of the distant sea. Here, between the shifting tides and the painted heavens, something wondrous is about to begin. Before there was love, before beauty found its place in the hearts of gods or mortals, there was a single moment when desire itself rose from the sea, a force so powerful that it would change the destinies of everyone who ever dreamed, hoped, or longed. Tonight, as the world grows soft and the hush of evening settles around you, we'll drift to the birthplace of Aphrodite. What secret did the waves hold that gave rise to the goddess of love? And why did her arrival make even the gods jealous, reshaping passion and rivalry for all eternity? What is the true power hidden behind Aphrodite's beauty, and who paid the greatest price for her affections? Let these mysteries gently guide your thoughts as the sea whispers and starlight falls over timeless shores. If these stories truly help you relax, feel free to leave a gentle like. If you'd like, you're welcome to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you now. Tonight, you're among fellow dreamers, united by ancient tides. Long before mortals ever set foot on Earth, while the cosmos was still young and the gods struggled to shape reality itself, an act of shocking violence would ignite the beginning of something breathtakingly beautiful. Uranus, the vast sky god, lies in endless embrace with Gaia, the patient earth goddess, their union responsible for the mighty titans who dwell in the depths. But Uranus, plagued by jealousy and fearing his offspring, forces them back into Gaia's womb, never allowing them to witness the light of the world. In her agony and rage, Gaia crafts a razor-sharp sickle and entrusts it to her youngest son, Cronus. When Uranus returns to claim the earth once more, Cronus acts swiftly and with terrible purpose, severing his father's power and casting it into the sea. The remains of Uranus strike the wine-dark waves, sending a singular ripple through creation. At first, there is only the gentle rocking of divine flesh on the ocean currents, but soon, luminous foam begins to gather, swirling and pulsing as if the sea itself is conscious of the momentous change. From this sacred foam, something miraculous occurs. A figure starts to emerge, not born through pain or time, but rising fully formed from the waters herself. Delicate fingers pierce the surface, followed by graceful arms and a face of immaculate beauty, instantly captivating any who witness her arrival. This is Aphrodite, her name forever tied to the foam from which she was born. She rises from the waves, golden hair tumbling down her back in ripples that echo the sea. The glow of her skin rivals the light of the stars, and she glides toward the shore, propelled by winds and currents that seem eager to serve their new mistress. As Aphrodite steps onto the sand, flowers bloom where the foam touches earth, roses unfurl, myrtle springs forth, and anemones create a tapestry fit for the new goddess. Her every footfall transforms the landscape, bringing vibrance and beauty, and hinting at the love and desire she's destined to spread throughout the world. The Horae, goddesses of the seasons, welcome her with garments woven from mist and starlight, draping her in fabrics that accentuate her unearthly radiance. They gather around, fastening a golden girdle around her waist, known as her magical Cestus, a symbol that will greatly influence the hearts of gods and mortals alike. But while beauty flourishes and the world celebrates her arrival, far greater consequences and conflicts begin to stir beneath the surface. Aphrodite's powers will shape destinies, spark rivalries, and redefine love itself. As you follow her story, consider this. What price is paid when the force of desire enters the world, and how will even the greatest gods contend with Aphrodite's irresistible charm? This confusion wasn't limited to storytellers in ancient times. Philosophers, too, tried to make sense of Aphrodite's many faces. Plato, thinking as only philosophers can, went so far as to propose there were actually two distinct goddesses named Aphrodite, one heavenly, who governed the deeper bonds of soul to soul, and one pandemic, ruling over earthly passions and desires. His answer was elegant, if perhaps a bit convoluted, proving that even divine mysteries can entice the sharpest minds to search for patterns where none perfectly fit. And so, as we follow Aphrodite's influence through history, one fascinating question lingers. Which version of her story truly shaped the destinies of gods and mortals? Was she born from violence and cosmic change, or from gentler divine union? And does it matter when her power over love and desire remains unstoppable? Regardless of which birth story you choose to believe, one thing remains constant. Aphrodite's power over love, beauty and desire is absolute and transformative. She embodies the force that draws all living things together, that sparks the passion necessary for life to continue, and that makes existence something more than mere survival. As the newly born goddess familiarizes herself with her divine nature, you follow her first steps into the world of gods and mortals. Her beauty is so overwhelming that it immediately creates problems among both divine and mortal realms. Even the gods of Olympus, who are accustomed to supernatural beauty, find themselves stunned by her presence. Zeus himself recognizes the potential for chaos that Aphrodite's beauty represents. Wars could be fought, alliances shattered, and the carefully maintained balance of power destroyed if the gods were allowed to compete freely for her affections. With the pragmatic wisdom that characterizes his rule, Zeus decides that Aphrodite must be married quickly to prevent divine civil war. But to whom? The most eligible bachelor among the gods is certainly not the most appealing choice. Hephaestus, the smith god who crafts the weapons and tools of the gods, is Zeus's choice for a husband. Hephaestus is skilled, loyal, and reliable, but he is also physically deformed and socially awkward, qualities that Zeus believes will make him a safe choice, unlikely to inspire jealousy among the other gods. You watch this divine arranged marriage with the bemused recognition that even gods apparently struggle with relationship decisions that would make mortal matchmakers cringe. Hephaestus is, naturally, thrilled beyond words at his incredible fortune. He immediately sets to work creating magnificent gifts for his bride: golden jewellery, exquisite furniture, and most importantly, a magical girdle that enhances her already irresistible powers of attraction. Aphrodite, for her part, accepts this marriage with the resigned grace of someone who understands that divine politics sometimes override personal preferences. She takes up residence in Hephaestus's workshops, surrounded by the constant noise of hammering and the heat of divine forges. It's not exactly the romantic paradise one might expect for the goddess of love, but it provides stability and keeps the peace among the gods. However, if you've spent much time observing gods and their behaviour, you know that arranged marriages among immortal beings rarely unfold as planned. Aphrodite may be married to the smith god, but her heart, and other parts of her divine anatomy, are drawn elsewhere. Her eye soon falls upon Ares, the god of war, whose muscular physique and passionate nature represent everything that her husband is not. Ares, for his part, is completely smitten with the goddess of love. Unlike his usual approach to conquests, which typically involves more force than finesse, Ares courts Aphrodite with surprising gentleness. He brings her flowers, composes poetry, though admittedly not very good poetry, and shows her a tender side that few other beings ever witness. The irony is delicious. The god of violent warfare becomes a devoted romantic suitor, while the goddess of love engages in a secret affair that would make mortal adulterers seem positively innocent. Their love affair becomes one of the most passionate relationships in all of mythology. When Hephaestus is away working at his forges, Ares and Aphrodite steal away to secret locations where they can express their mutual desire. You can imagine them meeting in hidden groves, secluded beaches, and private chambers, their divine passion creating a kind of energy that affects the very air around them. Their love is so intense that it literally creates new life. They become the parents of several children who embody different aspects of their combined natures. Honestly, which divine love affair do you find most compelling? For me, it has to be Aphrodite and Ares. The idea that love and war are so intimately connected reveals something profound about the nature of passion itself. Their first child is Harmonia, the goddess of harmony and concord, whose existence represents the beautiful paradox that the union of love and war can actually create peace. Harmonia embodies the concept that opposite forces, when properly balanced, can produce something greater than either could achieve alone. She will later marry Cadmus, the founder of Thebes, and their wedding will be attended by all the gods, a celebration of the harmony her name represents. But love and war also produce darker offspring. Phobos and Deimos, twin sons whose names mean fear and terror, accompany their father Ares into battle. These divine twins represent the psychological warfare that love and conflict can wage on the human heart. Anyone who has ever experienced the terror of potential rejection or the fear of losing someone they love understands the power that Phobos and Deimos wield over mortal emotions. Eros, perhaps the most famous of Aphrodite's children, is also born from this union, though his origins are sometimes disputed in different myths. As the god of erotic love, Eros becomes his mother's constant companion and most trusted agent. You see him as a beautiful youth with golden wings, carrying a bow that shoots arrows tipped with the power to inspire instant, overwhelming love in anyone they strike. Together, mother and son form a formidable team, capable of reshaping the emotional landscape of both divine and mortal realms. However, all secret affairs eventually face exposure, and divine affairs are no exception. Helios, the all-seeing sun god who drives his golden chariot across the sky each day, witnesses one of Aphrodite and Ares' passionate encounters. Whether motivated by loyalty to Hephaestus, simple gossip-mongering, or a sense of moral duty, Helios reports what he has seen to the cuckolded husband. Hephaestus receives this news with the particular fury that only a betrayed spouse can fully understand. But being a craftsman rather than a warrior, he chooses to exact his revenge through skill rather than strength. Working with meticulous care and divine precision, Hephaestus forges a net so fine that it's virtually invisible, yet so strong that even gods cannot break it. He installs this trap above the bed where Aphrodite and Ares conduct their affair, then announces that he must travel away on urgent business. You can almost see Hephaestus hiding nearby, waiting with the patient satisfaction of someone whose careful planning is about to pay off. When the lovers next meet and fall into bed together, the net springs its trap, binding them together in their moment of passion. They struggle against the unbreakable bonds, but their attempts to escape only serve to make their predicament more obvious and embarrassing. Hephaestus then calls all the gods to witness his wife's adultery. This is the ancient equivalent of posting embarrassing photos on social media, except with the added dimension that the audience consists of immortal beings with their own complex relationships and judgments. The male gods arrive and react with a mixture of laughter, sympathy for Hephaestus, and, if they're honest, a certain amount of envy toward Ares. The goddesses, with more diplomatic discretion, decline to attend this humiliating spectacle. The trapped lovers endure the mockery and laughter of their divine audience, though their embarrassment is probably tempered by the fact that their affair is now completely in the open. Poseidon eventually intervenes, offering to guarantee payment of the adultery fine that Ares owes to Hephaestus according to divine law. The net is removed, and both lovers immediately flee in opposite directions, seeking to escape their shame. But divine passion is not easily deterred by public humiliation. Though they may be more discreet in the future, Aphrodite and Ares continue their relationship, their love only intensified by the trials it has survived. Their affair becomes an open secret among the gods, tolerated because their passion is so obviously genuine, and because, frankly, most of the other gods have their own romantic complications to worry about. This scandal establishes a pattern that will define much of Aphrodite's mythology. Her relationships are passionate, complicated, and often destructive to the established order. She represents the force of desire that disrupts carefully laid plans, challenges social conventions, and reminds everyone that love is ultimately more powerful than law, custom, or prudence. Beyond her marriage to Hephaestus and her affair with Ares, Aphrodite has numerous other relationships with both gods and mortals. She is linked romantically with Poseidon, the sea god, with whom she has several children including Rhodos, the personification of the island of Rhodes. Their relationship makes symbolic sense, the goddess who was born from sea foam returning to the ocean's embrace. Her liaison with Hermes, the messenger god, produces Hermaphroditus, a child who possesses both male and female characteristics. This offspring represents another aspect of Aphrodite's complex nature. Her power extends beyond simple heterosexual attraction to encompass all forms of love and desire. Hermaphroditus becomes a symbol of the fluidity and complexity of human sexuality, challenging rigid categories and binary thinking. With Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, Aphrodite has Priapus, a fertility god distinguished by his permanent and prominent erection. Priapus serves as a guardian of gardens and vineyards, his exaggerated sexuality serving both as a fertility blessing and as a comic reminder of the sometimes absurd extremes to which divine passion can extend. But perhaps the most significant of Aphrodite's relationships with mortals is her love affair with Anchises, a handsome shepherd prince from the region around Troy. This relationship produces Aeneas, who will become one of the most important heroes in both Greek and Roman mythology. You follow this story as it unfolds in the foothills of Mount Ida, where Anchises tends his flocks in the peaceful pastoral landscape of ancient Anatolia. Zeus, growing tired of Aphrodite's habit of causing gods to fall in love with mortals, decides to give her a taste of her own medicine. He causes the goddess herself to be struck with overwhelming desire for a mortal man. This divine punishment, though perhaps punishment isn't quite the right word for being compelled to experience love, leads Aphrodite to Anchises. You watch as Aphrodite disguises herself as a mortal maiden and approaches the young shepherd as he rests alone in his mountain hut. She appears to him clothed in shimmering garments that seem to glow with their own inner light, her jewelry catching the firelight and casting dancing reflections on the walls. Even disguised, her divine beauty is so overwhelming that Anchises immediately suspects he might be dealing with a goddess. Aphrodite spins an elaborate lie about her identity, claiming to be the daughter of a noble Phrygian family who has been kidnapped by Hermes and transported to this mountainside. She begs Anchises to take her to his parents so that they might arrange a proper marriage. The story is creative, detailed, and completely fabricated, which anyone who has ever tried to explain an unexpectedly complicated romantic situation might find relatably familiar. Anchises, despite his suspicions about her divine nature, is completely overwhelmed by lust and desire. He swears that he will have her, regardless of the consequences, and leads her to his bed, which is spread with the furs of bears and lions that he has killed. Their lovemaking is passionate and transcendent, a union between divine and mortal that creates something entirely new. After their union is complete, Aphrodite reveals her true identity to the terrified Anchises. She appears before him in her full divine glory, her beauty so radiant that he can barely look upon her. She reassures him that while mortals who sleep with goddesses often face terrible punishments, she will bear him a son who will become a great hero. This child will be Aeneas, whose destiny is to survive the fall of Troy and eventually become the ancestor of the Roman people. Aphrodite's prophecy about Aeneas proves remarkably prescient. When Troy falls to the Greeks, Aeneas does indeed escape, carrying his aged father Anchises on his shoulders as the city burns around them. He leads the surviving Trojans on a long journey that eventually brings them to Italy, where their descendants will found Rome. This makes Aphrodite, through her son, the ancestral goddess of the Roman people, a connection that later emperors like Julius Caesar and Augustus will claim as proof of their divine heritage. The relationship with Anchises also demonstrates Aphrodite's more tender and maternal side. Unlike many of her other affairs, this one is characterized by genuine affection and concern for her lover's well-being. She warns Anchises never to boast about sleeping with a goddess, lest Zeus punish him for his pride. When Anchises eventually disobeys this warning and is struck by lightning, Aphrodite mourns his injury and tends to him with devoted care. But not all of Aphrodite's relationships with mortals are so harmonious. Her love affair with Adonis becomes one of the most tragic and widely told stories in all of mythology, a tale that encompasses love, jealousy, death, and the cycle of seasons themselves. You encounter this story through Myrrha, a young princess whose beauty is so remarkable that her mother foolishly brags that her daughter surpasses even Aphrodite herself. This kind of comparison is exactly the sort of challenge that immortal beings take very seriously. Aphrodite, insulted by this claim, decides to punish both mother and daughter in a particularly twisted way. She causes Myrrha to be consumed by an overwhelming desire for her own father, the king. This curse represents one of the darker aspects of Aphrodite's power desire, without boundaries, love that violates natural order and social taboos. Driven mad by this unnatural lust, Myrrha enlists the help of her nurse to secretly sleep with her father. For 12 nights she enters his chamber in darkness, and the king, never suspecting the true identity of his lover, enjoys what he believes are the favors of a beautiful stranger. Only when he finally lights a lamp does he discover the horrible truth of his unknowing incest. Enraged and horrified, the king pursues his daughter with a sword, intending to kill her for this abomination. Myrrha flees into the wilderness, her shame and terror overwhelming her desire to live. She prays to the gods for transformation, begging to be removed from the world of the living without actually dying. The gods, perhaps taking pity on her plight, answer this prayer by transforming her into a myrrh tree. But Myrrha is pregnant with her father's child, and even her transformation cannot prevent the birth. 10 months later, the bark of the myrrh tree splits open, and from within emerges an infant boy of extraordinary beauty. This is Adonis, whose very name becomes synonymous with masculine beauty and desire. His birth from the myrrh tree explains why myrrh, with its bittersweet fragrance, becomes sacred to Aphrodite. Aphrodite discovers the abandoned infant and is immediately enchanted by his beauty. She takes him to Persephone, queen of the underworld, asking her to care for the child while he grows to maturity. This seems like a reasonable arrangement. Persephone is a responsible goddess who can provide a safe environment for the boy's upbringing. However, when Aphrodite returns years later to reclaim the now-grown Adonis, she faces an unexpected complication. Persephone has also fallen in love with the young man, and she refuses to give him up. What begins as a simple childcare arrangement becomes a custody battle between two of the most powerful goddesses in the pantheon. The dispute grows so heated that Zeus himself must intervene to mediate between them. His solution displays the kind of divine diplomacy that keeps peace among quarreling immortals. Adonis will spend 1/3 of each year with Aphrodite, 1/3 with Persephone, and 1/3 with whomever he chooses. Adonis naturally chooses to spend his free time with Aphrodite, giving the goddess of love 8 months with her beloved, while Persephone must content herself with only 4. This arrangement works well for a time. During the months that Adonis spends with Aphrodite, you see them as the perfect divine couple, hunting together in the forests, making love in flower-carpeted meadows, and enjoying the kind of passionate romance that mortals dream of achieving. Aphrodite, who usually prefers to stay aloft from mortal dangers, even takes up hunting to share Adonis's favorite pastime. But Adonis's beauty and Aphrodite's happiness with him inspire jealousy in others. Ares, who has tolerated Aphrodite's other relationships with relative equanimity, finds this particular affair especially galling. Perhaps it's the intensity of Aphrodite's love for Adonis, or perhaps it's the fact that this time she's chosen a mortal over a god, but Ares decides that this rival must be eliminated. The god of war chooses his weapon with cruel irony. Rather than facing Adonis in honest combat, Ares transforms himself into a wild boar, one of the most dangerous animals that hunters encounter. He waits in the forest where Adonis regularly hunts, biding his time until the young man is separated from his companions and vulnerable. When Adonis encounters this seemingly ordinary boar, he has no reason to suspect that he's facing a god in disguise. He attacks with the confidence of an experienced hunter, but his spear merely wounds the divine beast rather than killing it. The boar, Ares in animal form, charges with supernatural fury, goring Adonis with tusks that inflict wounds far more severe than any mortal animal could create. Aphrodite, sensing her beloved's distress, rushes to his aid, but she arrives too late. She finds Adonis bleeding to death in a forest clearing, his life ebbing away as she cradles him in her arms. Her grief is so intense that it creates permanent changes in the natural world. Where Adonis's blood falls, red anemone flowers bloom, their brief lifespan echoing the tragically short life of the beautiful youth. Where Aphrodite's tears touch the earth, they create roses, their thorns symbolizing the pain that accompanies even the deepest love. The goddess's mourning is so profound that it moves even Zeus to pity. He allows Adonis to return from the underworld for 6 months of each year, during which he can rejoin Aphrodite in the world of the living. This myth becomes closely associated with the cycle of seasons, as Adonis's annual death and resurrection mirror the death of vegetation in winter and its renewal in spring. The story of Adonis establishes several important themes that run throughout Aphrodite's mythology. First, it shows that even gods must face loss and grief, that divine love does not protect against mortal vulnerabilities. Second, it demonstrates the creative power of sorrow, as Aphrodite's tears literally transform into beautiful flowers that will comfort future lovers. Finally, it reveals the cyclical nature of love and loss, death and renewal that governs all life. But Aphrodite's influence extends far beyond her personal relationships. She plays crucial roles in some of the most important events in Greek mythology, often serving as the catalyst for stories that shape the destiny of entire nations. Perhaps the most significant of these is her involvement in the events that lead to the Trojan War, a conflict that begins with what appears to be a simple beauty contest, but ultimately destroys one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. The trouble starts at the wedding of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea nymph who will later become the mother of the hero Achilles. All the gods are invited to this celebration except for Eris, the goddess of discord, who is excluded because, quite reasonably, no one wants her chaotic presence disrupting the festivities. This slight, however, proves to be a catastrophic oversight. Eris, furious at being left out, decides to create exactly the kind of chaos that the other gods hoped to avoid. She crafts a golden apple of extraordinary beauty and inscribes it with the words, "To the fairest." Then, timing her intervention with malicious precision, she tosses this apple into the midst of the wedding celebration and disappears, leaving the gods to deal with the consequences. The apple immediately catches the attention of 3 goddesses, each of whom believes herself to be the fairest and therefore the rightful recipient of the prize. Hera, Zeus's wife and queen of the gods, stakes her claim based on her status and dignity. Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, argues that her intellectual and martial achievements make her the most beautiful. And Aphrodite contends that as the goddess specifically devoted to beauty and love, the apple obviously belongs to her. What follows is exactly the kind of divine argument that Zeus has learned to avoid at all costs. Each goddess presents her case with increasing passion and decreasing rationality, and the situation quickly escalates beyond any possibility of diplomatic resolution. Zeus realizes that whichever goddess he chooses will win his favor, while the other 2 will become his eternal enemies. Not exactly an appealing prospect when you're dealing with immortal beings who hold grudges for millennia. With the kind of political wisdom that has kept him in power through countless divine crises, Zeus declares that the decision must be made by a mortal judge. He chooses Paris, a prince of Troy who has gained a reputation for fairness and good judgment. Paris is currently working as a shepherd on Mount Ida, having been exiled from the city due to prophecies about the destruction he will bring to Troy. The irony of choosing someone prophesied to destroy his homeland as a judge in a dispute that will indeed lead to that destruction is either completely lost on Zeus or represents the kind of cosmic joke that the fates find amusing. Hermes, serving as divine messenger, leads the 3 goddesses to Mount Ida, where Paris is tending his flocks. The young man is understandably overwhelmed when 3 of the most powerful beings in the universe suddenly appear before him, each radiating divine beauty and authority. They explain the situation and ask him to choose which one deserves the golden apple, but they don't leave the decision entirely to his aesthetic judgment. Each goddess offers Paris a bribe that reflects her particular sphere of influence. Hera promises him political power and dominion over all of Asia and Europe, making him the greatest king in the world. This is an impressive offer, the chance to rule vast territories and command the loyalty of countless subjects. For someone currently working as a shepherd, it represents an almost unimaginable elevation in status and power. Athena offers him wisdom and skill in war, promising to make him the greatest warrior and strategist who ever lived. She would grant him tactical genius that could win any battle, strategic insight that could solve any problem, and combat skills that could defeat any opponent. For a young prince who must eventually reclaim his birthright and defend his city, this gift could prove invaluable. But Aphrodite's offer speaks to more immediate and visceral desires. She promises Paris the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta, whose beauty is so legendary that it has already inspired numerous suitors from across Greece. This promise appeals not just to Paris's desire for love, but to his vanity and his longing for validation. To possess Helen would prove his own worth and desirability in the most public way possible. Paris faces a choice between power, wisdom, and love, between the political advantages that could secure his future, the intellectual gifts that could make him great, and the emotional satisfaction that could make him happy. In a decision that will be analyzed and criticized for millennia to come, he chooses love over everything else and awards the golden apple to Aphrodite. This choice immediately makes enemies of Hera and Athena, who will spend the next several decades plotting the destruction of Troy in revenge for this slight. But Aphrodite is delighted with the outcome and immediately sets about fulfilling her promise. She helps Paris reclaim his position as a prince of Troy and then arranges for him to travel to Sparta on what appears to be a diplomatic mission. In Sparta, Paris is welcomed as an honored guest by King Menelaus and his queen, the famously beautiful Helen. The laws of hospitality require Menelaus to treat Paris with respect and generosity, which creates the perfect opportunity for Aphrodite to work her magic. She causes Helen to fall desperately in love with the Trojan prince and simultaneously inflames Paris's desire for her. Their love affair unfolds with the intensity and recklessness that characterizes all of Aphrodite's interventions. Helen abandons her husband, her daughter, and her responsibilities as queen to flee with Paris to Troy. Some versions suggest that she goes willingly, swept away by passion. Others claim that Paris kidnaps her by force. Either way, the result is the same. The most beautiful woman in the world is taken from her Greek husband by a Trojan prince, creating a scandal that demands response. Menelaus, naturally, is outraged by this betrayal of both marriage vows and guest friendship. He calls upon all the Greek kings who had once courted Helen and sworn to defend her marriage to join him in demanding her return. When the Trojans refuse to give Helen back, the Greeks launch what becomes known as the Trojan War, a 10-year conflict that will ultimately destroy Troy and cost countless lives. The war itself becomes a showcase for divine intervention and competing loyalties among the gods. Aphrodite consistently supports the Trojan side, protecting Paris in battle and advocating for her favorites among mortal warriors. Hera and Athena, still nursing their grudge over the golden apple, throw their support behind the Greeks and work tirelessly to ensure Troy's destruction. Aphrodite's involvement in the war leads to one of her most humiliating episodes when she intervenes to save Paris from a duel with Menelaus. The goddess wraps her favorite in a concealing mist and transports him away from the battlefield just as he's about to be defeated. Later, when she tries to rescue her son Aeneas from Diomedes, a Greek hero, she herself is wounded by a mortal spear. The sight of the goddess of love fleeing the battlefield with her hand bleeding provides comic relief in what is otherwise a grimly serious war. Her brother Apollo teases her about getting involved in masculine pursuits like warfare, suggesting she should stick to arranging marriages and other feminine concerns. It's a reminder that even gods have their limitations and that Aphrodite, despite her power, is not a war goddess. Speaking of limitations, what's your take on gods getting involved in human conflicts? For me, it has to be utterly exhausting. The idea of spending decades managing the outcome of a single war while also handling all your other divine responsibilities sounds like a truly thankless task. The Trojan War ultimately vindicates both Aphrodite's promise to Paris and the revenge sought by Hera and Athena. Paris does indeed possess Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, for nearly 10 years. Their love story becomes legendary, celebrated in poetry and song as one of the great romantic epics of all time. However, this happiness comes at an enormous cost. The complete destruction of Troy, the deaths of countless heroes on both sides, and the scattering of the surviving Trojans across the Mediterranean. When Troy finally falls to the Greek trick of the wooden horse, Paris dies defending his city, shot down by arrows guided by divine vengeance. Helen survives the war's end and eventually returns to Sparta with Menelaus, though their reconciliation is complicated by years of separation and betrayal. The war that began with Aphrodite's promise of love ends with death, destruction, and the bitter knowledge that even divine gifts come with unforeseen consequences. But the story doesn't end with the fall of Troy. Aphrodite's son Aeneas, born of her union with Anchises, survives the city's destruction and leads a group of refugees on a long journey to find a new homeland. This journey, immortalized in Virgil's Aeneid, takes the Trojans through various adventures and trials before they finally reach Italy, where they will establish the settlements that eventually become Rome. Through Aeneas, Aphrodite becomes the ancestral goddess of the Roman people, a connection that Roman leaders exploit for political advantage. Julius Caesar claims descent from Venus, the Roman name for Aphrodite, through Aeneas, using this divine lineage to justify his authority and ambitions. Augustus continues this tradition, commissioning temples and artwork that celebrate Venus as the divine mother of the Roman race. This political appropriation of Aphrodite's mythology demonstrates how gods and goddesses continue to influence human affairs long after their original stories have been established. The goddess who began as a personification of love and desire becomes a symbol of imperial power and national identity, showing how divine figures evolve to meet the needs of different cultures and eras. Beyond these large-scale conflicts and political connections, Aphrodite also involves herself in numerous smaller stories that reveal different aspects of her complex nature. Some of these tales show her as a beneficent goddess who rewards virtue and true love, while others reveal her vindictive side when she feels insulted or ignored. One of the most charming of these smaller stories involves Pygmalion, a sculptor living on the island of Cyprus who becomes so disgusted with the flaws and failings of mortal women that he swears off love entirely. This decision might seem like a reasonable response to a series of disappointing relationships, but it also represents a rejection of Aphrodite's domain that the goddess cannot ignore. Instead of seeking companionship among living women, Pygmalion channels all his passion and longing into his art. He begins work on a statue of a woman, carving from ivory with such skill and devotion that the finished piece surpasses anything he has ever created. The statue, which he names Galatea, is so lifelike and beautiful that Pygmalion finds himself falling in love with his own creation. This presents an interesting psychological situation. A man so disappointed by real relationships that he prefers the safety of loving someone who cannot reject, betray, or disappoint him. Pygmalion treats Galatea as if she were alive, dressing her in fine clothes, adorning her with jewelry, and speaking to her as if she could respond. He brings her gifts of flowers and pretty stones, and each night he sleeps beside the statue, longing for her to return his affection. During the festival of Aphrodite, Pygmalion visits the goddess's temple and makes offerings at her altar. Instead of praying directly for his statue to come to life, which might seem presumptuous, he diplomatically asks the goddess to grant him a wife who resembles his beloved Galatea. This careful wording shows both respect for the goddess's power and awareness that gods prefer to interpret prayers in their own way. Aphrodite, who has been observing Pygmalion's devotion with growing interest, decides to reward his genuine love and artistic skill. When he returns home and kisses Galatea as he does every evening, he notices that the ivory lips seem warm beneath his own. He touches her hand and finds that it yields like living flesh rather than hard stone. Slowly, miraculously, the statue transforms into a living woman who returns his love with equal devotion. Their marriage becomes one of the happiest in all of mythology, blessed by Aphrodite and resulting in children who carry on both Pygmalion's artistic talents and Galatea's divine origins. Their son Paphos gives his name to the city on Cyprus that becomes one of Aphrodite's most important cult centers, creating a lasting connection between this love story and the goddess's worship. The myth of Pygmalion and Galatea has inspired countless later works of art and literature, from ancient Roman poetry to modern musical theatre. It speaks to the transformative power of love and art, and to the idea that sincere devotion can literally bring dreams to life. It also shows Aphrodite in one of her most benevolent aspects, rewarding genuine feeling rather than punishing or manipulating it. But not all of Aphrodite's interactions with artists and lovers end so happily. The story of Psyche and Eros reveals both the goddess's capacity for jealousy and the ultimately redemptive power of love that transcends even divine vengeance. This tale begins when reports reach Olympus of a mortal princess whose beauty rivals that of Aphrodite herself. Psyche, the youngest daughter of a king, is so extraordinarily beautiful that people begin to worship her instead of offering proper reverence to Aphrodite. Temples dedicated to the goddess stand empty while crowds gather to admire the mortal girl, calling her a new Venus and offering her the honors that belong to the divine. This kind of competition is exactly what immortal beings find most threatening, not just personal insult, but the real possibility that mortals might replace gods with more accessible alternatives. Aphrodite's response is swift and merciless. She commands her son Eros to use his arrows to make Psyche fall in love with the most hideous and despicable creature he can find. This punishment would destroy the girl's beauty by association and demonstrate the folly of mortals who dare to compete with gods. It's the kind of revenge that makes perfect sense from a divine perspective, elegant, poetic, and devastatingly effective. However, Eros encounters an unexpected complication when he arrives to carry out his mother's orders. Upon seeing Psyche, he is so struck by her beauty that he accidentally wounds himself with one of his own arrows. The god of love falls instantly and completely in love with the mortal he was supposed to curse, creating a conflict between duty to his mother and his own overwhelming desire. Unable to harm Psyche but unwilling to openly defy Aphrodite, Eros chooses a middle path that satisfies neither his obligation nor his desire completely. He arranges for Psyche to be transported to a magnificent palace where she lives in luxury but never sees her mysterious benefactor. Each night, Eros visits her in darkness, making love to her with passionate tenderness, but always leaving before dawn to preserve his anonymity. This arrangement works well for both lovers initially. Psyche enjoys the devotion of a lover who treats her like a goddess, while Eros satisfies his passion without revealing his disobedience to Aphrodite. Their relationship develops genuine depth as they spend their nights talking, as well as making love, sharing thoughts and dreams in the intimate darkness that conceals physical appearance while revealing emotional truth. But secrecy places its own strains on love, and Psyche begins to long for a normal relationship with someone she can see and know completely. Her sisters, visiting her in the palace, feed her fears by suggesting that her mysterious lover must be the monster that the oracle originally predicted she would marry. They convince her that she should discover his true identity, even if it means violating his trust. One night, after Eros has fallen asleep beside her, Psyche lights a lamp and gazes upon her lover's face for the first time. Instead of the monster she feared, she sees the most beautiful of all the gods, his golden hair spread across the pillow and his divine features peaceful in sleep. Her relief and joy are so great that her hands tremble, causing a drop of hot oil to fall from the lamp onto Eros's shoulder. The god wakes immediately, sees what Psyche has done, and realizes that their secret relationship can no longer continue. He flees without explanation, leaving Psyche alone in the palace with only her guilt and confusion for company. Soon, even the palace disappears, and she finds herself standing in an empty field with no idea how to find her lost love or repair the trust she has broken. When Aphrodite learns of her son's disobedience and his relationship with her rival, her fury reaches heights that terrify even other gods. She imprisons Eros in her own palace, treating him more like a prisoner than a son, while she plots elaborate revenge against Psyche. The goddess's punishment goes beyond simple cruelty. She designs a series of apparently impossible tasks that will either kill Psyche or demonstrate her unworthiness of divine love. The first task requires Psyche to sort an enormous pile of mixed grains, wheat, barley, lentils, beans, and poppy seeds, into separate heaps before sunset. This labor would challenge an entire workforce, much less a single person working alone. However, Psyche's genuine love and suffering have begun to attract divine sympathy. A colony of ants takes pity on her and works through the day to complete the sorting, allowing her to present Aphrodite with perfectly organized grain piles when evening comes. Frustrated but not defeated, Aphrodite assigns a second task. Psyche must gather golden wool from a flock of violent, man-eating sheep that graze beside a dangerous river. This challenge seems even more impossible than the first, as the sheep are known to attack anyone who approaches them during daylight hours. But again, divine assistance arrives in the form of a river reed that whispers advice to wait until evening, when the sheep become docile and leave bits of their golden fleece caught on thorns and branches. The third task sends Psyche to the top of a high mountain to fill a crystal vial with water from a spring that feeds the rivers, Styx and Cestus. The spring is guarded by dragons and surrounded by slippery rocks that make approach impossible for mortal beings. This time, Zeus's eagle takes pity on the girl and carries the vial to the spring, filling it with the precious water and returning it to her grateful hands. Each successful completion of these tasks only increases Aphrodite's anger and determination to destroy her rival. For the fourth and most dangerous task, she sends Psyche to the underworld itself with instructions to ask Persephone for a box containing divine beauty that Aphrodite claims to need for her own use. This errand requires Psyche to journey to the realm of the dead and return safely, a trip that few mortals have ever accomplished. The journey to Hades presents numerous opportunities for death or permanent entrapment. Psyche must resist the temptation to help other suffering souls she encounters, must pay the ferryman Charon with coins placed under her tongue, and must appease the three-headed dog Cerberus with honey cakes. Most importantly, she must remember not to look inside the box that Persephone gives her, regardless of how curious she becomes about its contents. Psyche successfully navigates all these dangers and obtains the box of beauty from Persephone, who seems sympathetic to her plight. The return journey goes smoothly until Psyche is almost back to the world of the living. At this point, her curiosity and her desire to make herself more beautiful for Eros overcome her caution. She opens the box, hoping to borrow just a little of the divine beauty for herself. However, the box contains not beauty but a deadly sleep that belongs to the underworld, a supernatural slumber that immediately overcomes Psyche and leaves her lying unconscious on the path between worlds. She has completed all of Aphrodite's tasks successfully, only to fall victim to her own human weakness at the very end. But love, as the poets constantly remind us, conquers all obstacles eventually. Eros, who has been pining away in his mother's palace, finally escapes his confinement and searches for his beloved. When he finds Psyche unconscious beside the road, he gathers the deadly sleep back into its box and wakes her with a gentle touch of his arrows. Their reunion is tender and passionate, but both lovers know that they still face the wrath of Aphrodite and the disapproval of the other gods. Eros takes their case directly to Zeus, arguing that his love for Psyche is genuine and that she has proven her devotion through all the trials she has endured. Zeus, who has his own romantic history and understands the power of love, decides to support the young couple. He elevates Psyche to divine status, making her immortal and giving her wings like her beloved, then commands Aphrodite to accept this new daughter-in-law and end her persecution. The wedding of Eros and Psyche becomes one of the great celebrations in divine history, attended by all the gods and goddesses who witness the triumph of love over jealousy, trust over suspicion, and perseverance over seemingly impossible obstacles. Their union produces a daughter named Voluptuous Pleasure, who represents the joy that comes from love that has been tested and proven worthy. This story, while containing many traditional mythological elements, also functions as a profound allegory about the soul's journey toward divine love. Psyche's name means soul in Greek, and her trials represent the challenges that human beings must face in their quest for spiritual enlightenment and transcendence. Her initial fall from grace through curiosity and disobedience, her period of testing and purification, and her ultimate reunion with divine love mirrors the spiritual journey that many religious traditions describe. But beyond its allegorical meanings, the story of Psyche and Eros also reveals important aspects of Aphrodite's character. Her initial jealousy and cruelty show the darker side of divine nature. Gods can be petty, vindictive, and dangerously powerful when their pride is wounded. However, her eventual acceptance of Psyche as a daughter-in-law suggests that even divine anger can be overcome by genuine love and proven devotion. Now, honestly, which mythological trial do you think would be the most challenging? For me, it has to be the journey to the underworld. The idea of traveling to the realm of the dead while still alive seems like the ultimate test of both courage and faith in eventual return. Aphrodite's tendency toward vindictive punishment appears in numerous other stories throughout her mythology. She consistently punishes mortals who neglect her worship, reject love entirely, or dare to compare themselves or others to her divine beauty. These punishment stories serve both as entertainment and as cautionary tales, warning audiences about the dangers of ignoring or insulting the gods. The story of Hippolytus provides a particularly tragic example of Aphrodite's vengeful nature. Hippolytus, son of the hero Theseus, is a young man devoted to hunting and athletics who shows no interest in love or sexuality. He worships Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt, and explicitly rejects Aphrodite's domain, declaring that he finds sexual desire disgusting and beneath his dignity. This rejection represents more than personal preference. It's a fundamental denial of one of the basic forces that govern life and ensure its continuation. Aphrodite cannot allow such a rejection to go unpunished, both because it insults her personally and because it threatens the natural order that she helps maintain. Her revenge, however, proves more destructive than she originally intends. Aphrodite causes Phaedra, Hippolytus' stepmother and Theseus' wife, to fall desperately in love with the young man. This creates an impossible situation for everyone involved. Phaedra suffers from a passion she cannot honorably express. Hippolytus is horrified by his stepmother's advances, and Theseus faces the choice between believing his wife or his son when the truth finally emerges. The situation deteriorates rapidly when Phaedra, unable to bear her shame and rejection, hangs herself but leaves behind a letter falsely accusing Hippolytus of raping her. Theseus, enraged by what he believes is his son's betrayal, calls upon Poseidon to kill the young man. The sea god sends a monstrous bull from the ocean that frightens Hippolytus' horses, causing them to bolt and drag their driver to his death. Only after Hippolytus dies does Artemis appear to reveal the truth to Theseus, explaining how Aphrodite's revenge has destroyed an entire family. The tragedy demonstrates how divine punishment often exceeds the original offense, creating collateral damage that affects innocent people along with the intended target. Aphrodite achieves her goal of punishing someone who rejected love, but at the cost of multiple deaths and lasting grief. Similar patterns appear in other punishment stories. When Narcissus, a beautiful young man, callously rejects all who fall in love with him, Aphrodite causes him to fall in love with his own reflection in a pool of water. Unable to touch or possess the image he desires, Narcissus wastes away and dies, transforming into the flower that bears his name. The punishment fits the crime. Someone who refused to return love becomes trapped in impossible love for himself. The women of Lemnos learn the consequences of neglecting Aphrodite's worship when the goddess punishes them with a terrible smell that drives away all their husbands and lovers. Only when they properly honor the goddess and restore her cult does she lift this humiliating curse. The story emphasizes the importance of maintaining proper relationships with the gods through regular worship and offerings. These punishment tales share common themes that reflect ancient Greek religious and social values. They warn against hubris, the dangerous pride that leads mortals to think they can safely ignore or insult the gods. They emphasize the importance of accepting natural desires and impulses, rather than trying to suppress or deny them completely. And they demonstrate that divine justice, while sometimes harsh, ultimately serves to maintain cosmic order and balance. But Aphrodite's mythology is not entirely concerned with passion, punishment, and divine politics. She also plays important roles in stories that celebrate the positive aspects of love, beauty, and artistic creation. Her involvement in these tales shows her as a beneficent force that inspires human achievement and rewards virtue, demonstrating that her power can create as well as destroy. The contest between the three goddesses for the golden apple, while ultimately leading to the Trojan War, also establishes Aphrodite as the personification of beauty itself. Her victory in this divine beauty contest confirms her status as the most beautiful being in existence, a recognition that validates her role as the goddess who governs aesthetic appreciation and artistic inspiration. Artists throughout antiquity seek Aphrodite's blessing for their work, knowing that her favor can elevate their creations beyond mere craftsmanship to true beauty. Sculptors pray to her before carving statues, poets invoke her before composing love songs, and painters seek her guidance in capturing the essence of beauty in their work. The goddess responds to sincere devotion by granting inspiration and skill that produces masterpieces celebrated for generations. The island of Cyprus, where Aphrodite first came to shore after her birth from sea foam, becomes the center of her most important cult. Here, pilgrims from across the Mediterranean world come to worship at her temples and participate in festivals that celebrate love, beauty, and fertility. The city of Paphos, named after her grandson, houses her most sacred shrine, where priests and priestesses conduct rituals that have been passed down through countless generations. These religious ceremonies often involve music, dancing, and theatrical performances that tell stories from the goddess's mythology. Participants crown themselves with roses and myrtle, Aphrodite's sacred plants, and offer her gifts of honey, wine, and fragrant oils. The festivals create communal celebrations of love that strengthen social bonds while honoring the divine force that makes such connections possible. The worship of Aphrodite also includes practices that might seem shocking to modern sensibilities, but were considered sacred in the ancient world. Some of her temples employ sacred prostitutes, both male and female, who serve the goddess by offering sexual services to worshippers. This practice reflects the belief that sexual activity, when conducted in the proper sacred context, can serve as a form of worship that honors the goddess of love and desire. These religious prostitutes are not considered degraded or immoral, but rather as honored servants of the goddess who help others connect with the divine through physical intimacy. The money they earn goes to support the temple and its activities, making their work both spiritually meaningful and economically important for the religious community. As Greek civilization spreads throughout the Mediterranean world, Aphrodite's worship adapts to different cultures and local traditions. In Rome, she becomes Venus, a goddess who retains her association with love and beauty, but also acquires new responsibilities as the divine ancestor of the Roman people. Roman emperors claimed descent from Venus through Aeneas, using this divine lineage to legitimize their political authority and connect their rule to cosmic order. Roman Venus appears on countless coins, statues, and public monuments, her image serving as a symbol of imperial power and cultural achievement. Temples dedicated to her are built throughout the empire, spreading her worship from Britain to Africa and from Spain to Africa and from Spain to Asia Minor. Her mythology influences Roman literature, art, and philosophy, helping to create a shared cultural identity that unites diverse peoples under Roman rule. The transformation of Greek Aphrodite into Roman Venus demonstrates how religious beliefs evolve to meet the needs of different societies. While the core attributes of love, beauty, and desire remain constant, the goddess acquires new roles and significance as her worship spreads to new communities with their own values and priorities. During the later Roman period, Aphrodite Venus also becomes associated with philosophical and mystical traditions that interpret her mythology symbolically rather than literally. Neo-Platonist philosophers see her as representing the cosmic force that draws all things toward unity and perfection. Christian writers, while generally hostile to pagan gods, sometimes acknowledge Venus as a symbol of divine love, though they carefully distinguish between earthly passion and spiritual devotion. These philosophical interpretations add new layers of meaning to Aphrodite's mythology without entirely replacing the traditional stories. The goddess continues to inspire artists, lovers, and dreamers while also serving as a symbol for abstract concepts like beauty, harmony, and the creative force that drives cosmic evolution. As the Roman Empire gradually converts to Christianity, the worship of Aphrodite Venus officially ends, but her influence on Western culture continues through art, literature, and popular imagination. Renaissance artists rediscover classical mythology and create some of the most famous images of Venus ever produced, from Botticelli's Birth of Venus to Titian's numerous Venus paintings. These works help preserve and transmit the goddess's mythology to new generations who might otherwise lose touch with these ancient stories. The influence of Aphrodite extends far beyond the classical world into modern literature, psychology, and popular culture. Her name gives us the word aphrodisiac for substances that increase sexual desire. Psychologists use the term Aphrodite complex to describe certain patterns of romantic behavior. Her stories inspire countless novels, films, and songs that explore themes of love, beauty, and desire. Modern interpretations of Aphrodite's mythology often focus on her role as a symbol of feminine power and sexual liberation. Feminist writers reclaim her as a goddess who celebrates female sexuality without shame or apology, seeing her as an alternative to religious traditions that treat physical desire as sinful or degrading. This contemporary understanding of Aphrodite emphasizes her autonomy and agency. She chooses her own lovers, pursues her own desires, and refuses to be constrained by conventional morality. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of Aphrodite's mythology is its recognition that love, in all its forms, represents one of the most powerful forces in human experience. Her stories acknowledge both the creative and destructive potential of desire, the joy and suffering that accompany deep emotional connections, and the ways that love can transform both individuals and entire civilizations. From her birth in sea foam to her role in the fall of Troy, from her tender care of Aeneas to her vindictive punishment of those who reject her gifts, Aphrodite embodies the complex reality of love itself. She reminds us that passion cannot be safely controlled or entirely avoided, that beauty has the power to inspire both creation and destruction, and that the forces that draw us together are as fundamental to existence as gravity or time. As you drift toward sleep, carried by the gentle rhythm of waves that first brought Aphrodite to shore, you might reflect on the enduring power of her mythology. These ancient stories continue to resonate because they address universal human experiences, the longing for beauty, the desire for connection, the joy of love fulfilled, and the sorrow of love lost. They remind us that these experiences are not merely personal, but cosmic, connecting us to forces that have shaped the world since the beginning of time. Whether you understand Aphrodite as a literal goddess, a psychological symbol, or a poetic representation of natural forces, her stories offer wisdom about navigating the complex landscape of human relationships. They suggest that love requires both courage and humility, that beauty involves both pleasure and responsibility, and that the heart's desires, however inconvenient, cannot be safely ignored. In the end, Aphrodite's greatest gift may be her reminder that love, in all its messy, complicated, wonderful and terrible manifestations, is what makes existence meaningful rather than merely functional. She teaches us that the risks of opening our hearts are worth taking, that the beauty we create and cherish gives life its deepest significance, and that the connections we forge with others are among the most precious things we can possess. As the goddess of love continues her eternal dance between creation and destruction, joy and sorrow, passion and peace, she invites us to join her in celebrating the magnificent, terrible, beautiful complexity of being alive and capable of love. In her mythology, we find not answers, but recognition. The comfort of knowing that our deepest struggles and greatest joys have been understood and honored since the dawn of human consciousness. And so, as you rest in the knowledge that love itself watches over your dreams, may you find peace in Aphrodite's ancient wisdom, that to love and be loved, in whatever form that blessing takes, is to participate in the fundamental force that brought the universe into being and continues to shape its destiny. But the story of Aphrodite extends far beyond even these profound themes, reaching into territories that reveal her as one of the most complex and multifaceted deities in all of mythology. To truly understand her power and influence, you must delve deeper into the sacred mysteries that surround her divine nature, exploring the hidden aspects of her worship and the secret knowledge that her most devoted followers possessed. You find yourself drawn into the first of these deeper mysteries as you contemplate the true nature of Aphrodite's most iconic possession, her magical girdle known as the Cestus. This is not merely a beautiful accessory or a symbol of her divine status, but rather the very source and manifestation of her irresistible power over love and desire. The Cestus represents one of the most fascinating concepts in all of mythology, the idea that attraction itself is a tangible force, something that can be woven, crafted, and even borrowed or shared. The creation of the Cestus begins in the workshops of Hephaestus, where divine craftsmanship meets mystical knowledge to produce artifacts of unimaginable power. You watch as the smith god, still deeply in love with his unfaithful wife, pours all his skill and devotion into creating the perfect gift for her. But this is no ordinary piece of jewelry. Hephaestus understands that to create something worthy of Aphrodite, he must work with forces that transcend mere physical materials. The base of the Cestus is woven from threads that shimmer with colours that have no names in mortal languages, hues that shift between the gold of sunrise on calm waters and the deep rose of sunset reflected in a lover's eyes. These threads are not spun from any earthly fibre, but rather from the essence of desire itself, drawn from the moments of first attraction between all living beings throughout the cosmos. Each thread carries within it the memory of countless first glances, stolen kisses, and whispered declarations of love. Into this ethereal fabric, Hephaestus weaves elements that embody every aspect of romantic attraction. Here is persuasion, which draws souls together through the power of words and gestures that seem to speak directly to the heart. There is charm, which makes ordinary conversations feel like poetry and transforms simple presence into magnetic allure. Sweet conversation finds its place in the weave, representing the way that lovers can talk for hours without noticing time passing, finding endless fascination in each other's thoughts and dreams. The girdle contains love itself, not as an abstract concept, but as a living force that pulses through its fibers like a heartbeat. This love is not the gentle affection of long marriage or the protective care of parents for children, but the wild, desperate, transformative love that makes people abandon everything they thought they knew about themselves. It is the love that launches ships and burns cities, that inspires the greatest poetry and the most reckless decisions. Desire is woven so thoroughly into the cestus that the girdle itself seems to breathe with yearning. This is physical attraction in its most primal and honest form, the magnetic pull that draws bodies together, the sweet torment of longing that makes every moment apart feel like an eternity. It is the force that ensures the continuation of life itself, the biological imperative transformed into something approaching divine ecstasy. But perhaps most mysteriously, the cestus contains elements that exist only in the liminal spaces between defined emotions. There are threads of anticipation, that delicious tension that builds before a first kiss or a long-awaited reunion. There is the bittersweet ache of remembered love, the way that past happiness can be both a comfort and a torment. There are fibers woven from the moment when friendship transforms into something deeper, when casual affection suddenly blazes into passionate devotion. The girdle also holds darker threads, for Hephaestus understands that true power over love must encompass its shadow aspects as well. Here is jealousy, which can transform love into a consuming fire that destroys everything it touches. Here is obsession, which twists healthy attachment into desperate need. Here are the lies that lovers tell themselves and each other, the self-deceptions that allow passion to override wisdom and common sense. When Aphrodite first wears the completed cestus, its power exceeds even her divine expectations. The girdle amplifies her natural beauty until even she is amazed by her reflection. But more importantly, it creates an aura of irresistible attraction that extends far beyond physical appearance. Anyone who looks upon her while she wears the cestus finds themselves overwhelmed by emotions they cannot name or control, drawn to her by forces that seem to operate at the level of cosmic law rather than personal choice. The cestus becomes famous throughout the divine and mortal realms for its ability to inspire instant, overwhelming love in anyone upon whom its power is focused. But Aphrodite discovers that the girdle's influence extends far beyond simple romantic attraction. When she wears it, she can inspire armies to fight with unprecedented courage for causes they barely understand, move entire populations to abandon their homes in pursuit of distant dreams, and cause the most rational individuals to make decisions based purely on emotion rather than logic. This power proves both a blessing and a burden, for while the cestus gives Aphrodite tremendous influence over both gods and mortals, it also makes her partially responsible for every action taken under its spell. When lovers inspired by the girdle's magic abandon their families, when warriors driven by its influence commit acts of terrible violence, when cities fall because their defenders are too distracted by passion to properly guard their walls, all of this becomes part of Aphrodite's divine legacy. The most famous instance of the cestus being loaned to another occurs during the Trojan War, when Hera seeks to manipulate the conflict's outcome by distracting her husband Zeus from his attempt to maintain neutrality between the warring sides. Hera understands that her own beauty, while certainly impressive, lacks the overwhelming power necessary to completely capture Zeus's attention during such a crucial period. She needs something more potent, something that can overwhelm even the king of gods' political calculations and strategic concerns. Approaching Aphrodite with a carefully crafted story about wanting to reconcile a quarreling married couple, Hera requests the loan of the cestus for what she presents as a noble cause of healing broken relationships. Aphrodite, either genuinely deceived by this fabrication or simply amused by the prospect of seeing her girdle's power tested on Zeus himself, agrees to the request. She unclasps the cestus from around her own waist and hands it to the queen of the gods, warning her to use its power wisely and return it promptly. Hera immediately employs the cestus in her seduction of Zeus, approaching him on Mount Ida where he watches the progress of the Trojan War with growing concern for both sides. The moment Zeus sees his wife wearing Aphrodite's magical girdle, all thoughts of maintaining divine neutrality vanish from his mind. The king of gods, who has successfully managed the complex politics of Olympus for millennia, finds himself as helpless as any mortal youth in the grip of first love. Their lovemaking on the mountain is so passionate and consuming that Zeus falls into a deep sleep afterward, leaving the battlefield unobserved and allowing Poseidon to intervene on behalf of the Greeks without divine opposition. This single use of the cestus changes the course of the entire war, demonstrating that even gods can become tools of fate when desire overrides duty and passion conquers prudence. The incident reveals several important truths about the nature of the cestus and the kind of power it represents. First, it shows that desire, when properly focused and amplified, can overcome even the strongest will and the most important responsibilities. Zeus's abandonment of his neutral stance during such a crucial moment illustrates how passion can make mockery of the most carefully laid plans and deeply held principles. Second, the episode demonstrates that the power of attraction operates according to its own logic, which often conflicts with social expectations, political necessities, and moral obligations. The cestus doesn't make bad people good or vice versa. Instead, it strips away the civilized veneer that allows society to function smoothly, revealing the primal desires and needs that drive all conscious beings at their most fundamental level. Third, Hera's successful borrowing of the girdle suggests that the power of attraction is not inherently tied to any single individual, even one as naturally gifted as Aphrodite. The cestus functions as a repository of universal desire, a kind of cosmic battery that stores and amplifies the attractive forces that exist everywhere in nature. This implies that while Aphrodite may be the goddess of love, love itself exists independently of her, flowing through the universe as a fundamental force like gravity or electromagnetic energy. The temporary loss of her girdle also affects Aphrodite in interesting ways, providing rare insight into how the goddess functions when stripped of her most powerful tool. During the time that Hera possesses the cestus, Aphrodite must rely on her natural beauty and charm, which, while certainly impressive, lack the overwhelming compulsion that the girdle provides. She finds herself working harder to achieve the same effects, needing to employ more subtle forms of persuasion and influence. This experience teaches Aphrodite valuable lessons about the relationship between natural gifts and artificial enhancements. She discovers that while the cestus greatly amplifies her power, it has also made her somewhat dependent on its influence. Without the girdle, she must redevelop skills in reading human nature, understanding individual desires, and crafting personally meaningful approaches to different targets. In many ways, this temporary powerlessness makes her a more sophisticated and effective goddess of love. When Hera eventually returns the cestus, Aphrodite has gained new appreciation for both the girdle's power and her own natural abilities. She begins to use the magical garment more selectively, reserving its overwhelming influence for situations that truly require irresistible compulsion, while relying on her enhanced understanding of mortal psychology for more subtle interventions. The cestus also becomes a symbol for one of mythology's most profound questions, whether true love can exist when it is magically compelled rather than freely chosen. The lovers who fall under the girdle's influence experience genuine emotions and real passion, but these feelings arise from supernatural intervention rather than natural compatibility or shared values. This raises troubling questions about the nature of consent, authenticity, and moral responsibility that echo through numerous mythological stories. Some philosophers argue that love inspired by the Cestus is actually more pure and honest than ordinary attraction, since it strips away social pretenses, economic calculations, and strategic considerations that often influence romantic decisions in the mortal world. Under the girdle's influence, people love based purely on the essential nature of their chosen partner, unencumbered by concerns about status, wealth, or social approval. Others contend that magically compelled love is inherently false, since it overrides the natural process of getting to know someone gradually and making conscious decisions about compatibility and commitment. They argue that the Cestus produces obsession rather than genuine affection, creating relationships built on supernatural compulsion rather than mutual understanding and respect. Aphrodite herself seems unconcerned with these philosophical debates, viewing love as a natural force that operates according to its own rules rather than human moral categories. From her divine perspective, the distinction between natural and supernatural attraction may be meaningless. All desire ultimately flows from the same cosmic source, and the Cestus simply makes visible the invisible forces that govern all romantic relationships. The girdle's influence on mortal affairs extends far beyond individual love stories to shape the course of entire civilizations. Cities rise and fall based on alliances forged or broken under its influence. Wars begin when leaders become distracted by passion at crucial moments, and trade routes shift when merchants become more interested in following beautiful companions than profitable opportunities. Yet the Cestus also inspires some of humanity's greatest achievements. Poets compose their most moving verses while under its spell. Artists create masterpieces that capture the essence of divine beauty, and musicians discover harmonies that seem to echo the music of the spheres themselves. The girdle's power to strip away inhibitions and social constraints allows creative individuals to access deeper levels of inspiration and authentic expression. As you contemplate the full implications of Aphrodite's magical girdle, you begin to understand why ancient peoples viewed love as a divine force rather than merely a human emotion. The Cestus represents the recognition that attraction operates according to mysterious laws that transcend individual will or social convention, that desire can reshape reality itself when properly channeled and directed. The girdle also serves as a reminder that power, even divine power, carries responsibility. Aphrodite's ability to inspire overwhelming love in others comes with the obligation to consider the consequences of such interventions, to balance the immediate satisfaction of desire against the long-term well-being of those affected by her influence. In the end, the Cestus becomes a symbol for the beautiful, terrible, transformative power of love itself, a force that can create or destroy, heal or wound, elevate or debase, depending on how it is wielded and understood. It reminds us that desire, while often dismissed as frivolous or superficial, actually represents one of the most profound and consequential aspects of existence, capable of reshaping both individual lives and the broader course of history. Moving deeper into the mysteries of Aphrodite's divine nature, you encounter one of the most sophisticated attempts by ancient thinkers to understand the paradoxical complexity of love itself. This exploration leads you into the philosophical distinction between two aspects of the goddess that seem to represent fundamentally different types of attraction and affection. A duality that reflects humanity's ongoing struggle to comprehend love's role in both earthly and spiritual existence. The philosopher Plato, grappling with the apparent contradictions in Aphrodite's mythology and the conflicting ways she was worshipped throughout the Greek world, proposed that there were actually two distinct goddesses bearing the same name. This wasn't merely an academic exercise or an attempt to resolve confusing mythological accounts, but rather a profound insight into the dual nature of love itself, which operates simultaneously as both a physical force driving biological reproduction and a spiritual power that elevates consciousness toward divine understanding. The first of these aspects he called Aphrodite Pandemos, meaning common Aphrodite, or Aphrodite of all the people. This manifestation of the goddess governed what we might call earthly love, the attraction between bodies, the desire for physical pleasure, the magnetic pull that draws individuals together for procreation and survival. Pandemos represented love in its most accessible and universal form, the kind of attraction that all living creatures experience and that requires no special education, spiritual development, or philosophical understanding to comprehend. You witness Aphrodite Pandemos in the passionate embraces of young lovers who care nothing for poetry or philosophy but are consumed by the immediate intensity of their physical desire. She appears in the urgent coupling of animals during mating seasons, in the irresistible urges that ensure the continuation of species, in the honest lust that drives mortals to seek partners based on beauty, strength, and reproductive fitness. This is love at its most primal and direct, uncomplicated by abstract ideals or spiritual aspirations. Pandemos governs the realm of sensual pleasure, where touch, taste, sight, sound, and scent combine to create experiences of overwhelming physical satisfaction. Under her influence, lovers explore each other's bodies with devoted attention, discovering the countless ways that skin can communicate what words cannot express. She blesses unions that produce children, celebrates the fertility that keeps the world populated with new life, and ensures that the biological imperative to reproduce remains pleasurable rather than merely dutiful. This aspect of Aphrodite also encompasses the social dimensions of love that serve practical purposes in mortal society. She oversees marriages arranged for political advantage, alliances cemented through strategic unions, and partnerships formed to combine resources, share labor, or provide mutual protection. While such relationships may lack the transcendent passion celebrated in poetry, they represent love's role in creating stable communities and maintaining social order. Pandemos particularly concerns herself with the love between people of different social classes, the attraction that crosses boundaries of wealth, status, and education. She makes the servant girl irresistible to the nobleman, inspires the wealthy merchant to fall desperately in love with a common artisan, and ensures that passion pays no attention to social hierarchies or economic disparities. In this role, she serves as a democratizing force that reminds everyone that desire operates according to its own logic rather than human systems of rank and privilege. The worship of Aphrodite Pandemos often took place in public spaces and involved entire communities, reflecting her role as a goddess of the people rather than an elite deity accessible only to philosophers and mystics. Her festivals included dancing, drinking, and celebration of sexuality in its most honest and unashamed forms. Sacred prostitution, where it occurred in her temples, served under the auspices of Pandemos, representing the idea that sexual pleasure could be both a commercial transaction and a form of religious devotion. But Plato recognized that human experience of love extended far beyond physical attraction and social utility into realms that seemed to touch something eternal and divine. This led him to identify a second aspect of the goddess, which he called Aphrodite Urania, meaning heavenly Aphrodite or celestial Aphrodite. This manifestation governed what we might call spiritual love, the attraction between souls, the desire for transcendent beauty, the magnetic pull that draws consciousness toward higher forms of understanding and existence. Aphrodite Urania appears not in bedrooms or marriage chambers, but in the sublime moments when beauty suddenly reveals deeper truths about the nature of reality itself. You encounter her when gazing at a sunset that seems to open a window into eternity, when listening to music that appears to echo harmonies from some celestial sphere, when reading poetry that captures emotions too profound for ordinary language. This is the goddess who inspires love for abstract ideals, devotion to ultimate truth, and the kind of attraction that elevates rather than merely satisfies. Under Urania's influence, lovers see in each other not just appealing bodies or compatible personalities, but reflections of divine beauty that exists beyond the physical world. Their attraction becomes a pathway to philosophical understanding, a means of approaching eternal truths through the contemplation of temporary but meaningful beauty. Such relationships often involve extensive conversation, shared intellectual pursuits, and the kind of mental intimacy that can develop between people whose minds resonate at similar frequencies. Urania governs what later thinkers would call platonic love relationships, characterized by deep emotional and intellectual connection, but not necessarily physical consummation. She blesses the love between teacher and student when it inspires genuine learning, the devotion between friends whose companionship elevates both parties, and the attraction to beauty that leads to artistic creation or philosophical insight. This is love as an educational force, a means of personal and spiritual development rather than merely physical satisfaction. The distinction between these two aspects of Aphrodite reflects ancient recognition that human beings exist simultaneously in physical and spiritual realms, with needs and desires that operate on multiple levels. Pandemos addresses our animal nature, our biological needs, and our social requirements, while Urania speaks to our capacity for transcendence, our longing for meaning, and our ability to perceive beauty that exists beyond material forms. However, this philosophical division, elegant as it appears in theoretical discussions, proves difficult to maintain when examining actual human relationships. Most genuine love affairs involve elements of both physical attraction and spiritual connection, combining sensual pleasure with emotional intimacy, practical compatibility with shared ideals. The lovers who experience only Pandemos may find their relationships satisfying in the short term but ultimately hollow, while those who attempt to live entirely under Urania's influence may discover that disembodied spiritual love lacks the grounding and vitality that physical expression provides. Aphrodite herself, as portrayed in mythology, seems to embody both aspects simultaneously rather than representing only one or the other. Her relationship with Ares involves intense physical passion, but also appears to be based on genuine affection and mutual understanding. Her love for Adonis combines overwhelming sensual attraction with tender care and deep emotional attachment. Her assistance to lovers like Pygmalion and Galatea demonstrates concern for both physical fulfillment and spiritual satisfaction. This suggests that the division between Pandemos and Urania, while useful for philosophical analysis, may not reflect the actual nature of the goddess or the experiences of her worshippers. Instead, these two aspects might be better understood as complementary facets of the single divine nature that encompasses all forms of love and attraction. The goddess operates simultaneously in both realms, inspiring desires that range from purely physical to entirely spiritual, often combining elements of both in relationships that satisfy multiple human needs. The worship of Aphrodite Urania typically occurred in more private and contemplative settings, often associated with philosophical schools or mystery religions that promised initiates deeper understanding of divine love. Her rituals emphasized meditation, study, and the cultivation of refined aesthetic sensibilities rather than the public celebrations and physical expressions favored by Pandemos cults. Followers of Urania might spend years learning to perceive beauty in increasingly subtle forms, training themselves to recognize divine love even in its most abstract manifestations. Yet the separation between these two forms of worship was never absolute, and many devotees honored both aspects of the goddess, recognizing that human nature requires both physical satisfaction and spiritual elevation. The most sophisticated approaches to Aphrodite's worship involved learning to see physical love as a pathway to spiritual understanding, using sensual experience as a means of approaching transcendent truth. This integration of Pandemos and Urania reflects one of the most profound insights of ancient Greek thought, the recognition that body and soul, physical and spiritual, temporal and eternal, are not separate realms but different aspects of a unified reality. Love serves as a bridge between these apparently contradictory dimensions of existence, allowing human beings to experience transcendence through embodiment, to touch the eternal through the temporal, to glimpse divine beauty through mortal forms. The philosophical implications of this dual nature extend far beyond romantic relationships to encompass all forms of human connection and creative activity. Artists working under the inspiration of both aspects might create works that satisfy aesthetic appreciation while also conveying deeper meanings that please the senses while elevating the spirit. Political leaders, guided by this integrated understanding, might craft policies that address practical needs while also inspiring citizens toward higher ideals. The tension between Pandemos and Urania also appears in religious contexts, where different communities emphasize either the accessible, democratic aspects of divine love or its more rarefied, transcendent dimensions. Some worship traditions focus on making spiritual experience available to all people, regardless of education or social status, while others maintain that genuine understanding of divine love requires extensive preparation and refined sensibilities. In personal relationships, the integration of both aspects creates the possibility for love that satisfies the complete person, body, mind, and spirit, working in harmony rather than conflict. Such relationships begin with honest physical attraction, but develop through shared experiences, mutual understanding, and gradually deepening appreciation for each other's essential nature. They combine passion with companionship, desire with respect, pleasure with growth. The modern world, with its tendency to compartmentalize different aspects of human experience, often struggles to understand this ancient wisdom about love's dual nature. Contemporary culture frequently treats physical attraction and spiritual connection as separate and often conflicting forces, creating unnecessary divisions between sexuality and spirituality, between passion and transcendence. Aphrodite's example suggests that such separations are artificial and ultimately destructive, preventing human beings from experiencing the full richness and complexity that love can offer. Her mythology consistently portrays her as a goddess who refuses to be limited to any single role or function, who embodies the complete spectrum of attraction and affection that exists in the universe. As you contemplate this philosophical understanding of Aphrodite's dual nature, you begin to appreciate why ancient peoples developed such sophisticated approaches to love and beauty. They recognized that these forces operate on multiple levels simultaneously, affecting not just individual lives, but the entire structure of reality. Their attempts to understand Pandemos and Urania represent early efforts to comprehend the mysterious ways that desire shapes both physical and metaphysical existence. The continuing relevance of this ancient insight becomes clear when you consider how contemporary relationships often founder on the failure to integrate physical and spiritual dimensions of love. Couples who base their unions entirely on sexual attraction may find their passion fading as bodies age and novelty wears off. Those who attempt to build relationships on shared ideals alone may discover that disembodied love lacks the vitality and grounding that sensual connection provides. The wisdom of Aphrodite, encompassing both Pandemos and Urania, suggests that the most fulfilling relationships involve learning to see the eternal within the temporal, the spiritual within the physical, the transcendent within the immediate. Such love does not require choosing between body and soul, but rather finding ways to honor and integrate both aspects of human nature. Which brings you to examine more closely one of the most pivotal moments in all of Greek mythology, a seemingly simple beauty contest that ultimately reshaped the ancient world and destroyed one of its greatest civilizations. The judgment of Paris represents far more than divine vanity or competitive goddesses vying for recognition. It serves as a profound allegory for the fundamental choices that define human existence and the far-reaching consequences that flow from prioritizing personal desire over collective responsibility. You find yourself transported to the slopes of Mount Ida, where this momentous decision unfolds in a setting that seems deceptively pastoral and peaceful. The morning sun illuminates rolling hills dotted with grazing sheep, while gentle breezes carry the scent of wildflowers and the sound of distant shepherd songs. This tranquil scene provides an ironic backdrop for events that will ultimately lead to the destruction of Troy, the deaths of countless heroes, and the reshaping of the entire eastern Mediterranean political landscape. Paris, the Trojan prince who must serve as judge in this divine beauty contest, represents a fascinating study in the psychology of choice under pressure. Exiled from Troy due to prophecies about the destruction he would bring to his homeland, he has spent years living as a shepherd, removed from the complexities of court politics and royal responsibility. In many ways, this exile has preserved his innocence. He approaches the goddess's bribes without the cynical calculation that might characterize a more experienced ruler. Yet this innocence also makes him more vulnerable to temptation, less capable of fully understanding the long-term implications of his decision. When three of the most powerful goddesses in the universe suddenly appear before him, each offering gifts that could transform his entire existence, Paris faces pressures that would challenge the wisdom of far more experienced judges. The choice he must make involves not just personal preference, but fundamental questions about what makes life worth living. Hera's offer of political power and dominion over vast territories appeals to the most obvious interpretation of human ambition. As queen of the gods and Zeus's wife, she understands the intoxicating appeal of authority, the satisfaction that comes from commanding others and shaping the destiny of nations. Her promise to make Paris the greatest king in the world addresses the desire for significance, for leaving a lasting mark on history, for achieving the kind of fame that survives long after physical death. The territories she offers, all of Asia and Europe, represent wealth and influence on an almost unimaginable scale. Paris could rule over diverse peoples, command vast resources, and wield the kind of power that shapes the course of civilizations. Such dominion would bring not just personal satisfaction but the ability to create lasting institutions, to improve the lives of countless subjects, and to establish a legacy that might endure for millennia. From a purely practical standpoint, Hera's offer makes considerable sense for someone in Paris's position. As an exiled prince with uncertain prospects for regaining his birthright, the guarantee of ultimate political success would solve all his immediate problems while opening possibilities he could never achieve through his own efforts. The wise choice, from the perspective of royal duty and public responsibility, would be to accept power that could be used to benefit both himself and his subjects. Athena's promise of wisdom and skill in war speaks to different but equally fundamental human aspirations. As goddess of strategic thinking and military prowess, she offers Paris the intellectual and martial abilities that could make him not just powerful, but deservedly so. Her gift would transform him into a leader worthy of the authority that Hera promises, someone whose rule would be based on genuine competence rather than mere divine favor. The wisdom Athena offers encompasses far more than tactical knowledge or combat skills, extending into the realm of philosophical understanding and practical judgment that enables leaders to make decisions benefiting their communities rather than merely serving their personal interests. Such wisdom might help Paris navigate the complex political situations that inevitably arise in governing diverse populations, allowing him to balance competing interests and find solutions that promote justice and prosperity. Her promise to make him the greatest warrior and strategist who ever lived addresses the heroic ideals that dominated ancient Greek culture. In a world where physical courage and military excellence represented the highest virtues, Athena's gift would elevate Paris to the status of legendary heroes like Achilles or Hector, ensuring that his name would be remembered with honor long after his death. The strategic implications of Athena's offer are particularly significant given the political tensions that already exist between Greece and Troy. A Paris equipped with supernatural military genius might be able to defend his homeland against any external threats, ensuring Troy's survival and prosperity for generations to come. The wisdom component of her gift might also enable him to find peaceful solutions to conflicts that would otherwise result in devastating warfare. But Aphrodite's promise operates in an entirely different realm, appealing not to ambition or honor, but to the more immediate and personal desire for love and happiness. Her offer of Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, speaks to the fundamental human longing for connection, for finding someone whose presence makes existence feel complete and meaningful. This is not a practical gift like political power or military skill, but rather an emotional and spiritual one that addresses needs that cannot be satisfied through external achievement alone. The significance of Helen extends beyond her personal beauty to encompass what she represents in the ancient world. As the daughter of Zeus and the wife of Menelaus, her status makes her more than simply an attractive woman. She embodies the ultimate prize, the kind of companion whose love validates the worthiness of whoever wins her affection. To possess Helen would prove Paris's own value in the most public and undeniable way, demonstrating that he deserves the love of someone whom all men desire. Aphrodite's offer also promises the kind of transcendent love that poets celebrate and that most people only dream of experiencing. The relationship she envisions between Paris and Helen would not be merely physical attraction or political alliance, but rather the sort of complete emotional and spiritual union that transforms both participants, making them more than they could ever be separately. Yet this promise comes with hidden costs that become apparent only in retrospect. The love Aphrodite offers is not Helen's freely given affection, but rather passion inspired through divine intervention, raising questions about consent and authenticity that complicate the apparent simplicity of the gift. Furthermore, Helen is already married to Menelaus and bound by both legal and sacred obligations that her abandonment would violate, creating moral complications that extend far beyond the immediate relationship. The choice Paris faces between these three offers represents a fundamental decision about values and priorities that every human being must make in various forms throughout life. The goddess's bribes can be understood as symbols for the different paths available to anyone seeking fulfillment and meaning: the path of power and achievement, the path of wisdom and excellence, or the path of love and personal happiness. From one perspective, Paris's decision to choose Aphrodite's gift represents the triumph of personal desire over public duty, the prioritization of individual satisfaction over collective responsibility. His choice leads directly to the abduction of Helen, the outbreak of the Trojan War, and ultimately the destruction of his homeland, consequences that might have been avoided if he had chosen differently. Critics of Paris's decision argue that he allows immediate gratification to override long-term considerations, that he fails to consider the broader implications of his choice for other people, and that he demonstrates exactly the kind of selfish thinking that makes him unworthy of the power and wisdom that the other goddesses offered. From this perspective, the destruction of Troy represents the inevitable consequence of placing personal desire above communal welfare. Yet another interpretation suggests that Paris's choice reflects a deeper wisdom about the nature of human fulfillment that the other options fail to address. Political power, however extensive, cannot satisfy the fundamental human need for love and connection. Military excellence, however impressive, cannot substitute for the emotional intimacy that makes life worth living. Paris's decision to prioritize love might be seen as a recognition that without meaningful relationships, all other achievements ultimately ring hollow. The love story of Paris and Helen, despite its tragic consequences, becomes one of the most celebrated romances in all of literature, inspiring countless poets, artists, and musicians throughout the centuries. Their passion achieves a kind of immortality that outlasts political empires and military victories, suggesting that Paris's choice, while destructive in practical terms, creates something of lasting value that continues to enrich human culture. The 10-year war that results from this divine beauty contest reveals the complex ways that individual choices can have far-reaching consequences that extend far beyond their original context. Paris's moment of decision on Mount Ida sets in motion a chain of events that affects not just his own life or even his immediate family, but entire civilizations throughout the ancient world. The war itself becomes a crucible that tests every character who participates, revealing both heroic nobility and human weakness in equal measure. Greek heroes like Achilles and Ajax achieve immortal fame through their battlefield exploits, while Trojan defenders like Hector demonstrate that courage and honor can exist even in a losing cause. The conflict produces some of the greatest literature ever created, as poets find in this tragedy the raw material for exploring fundamental questions about fate, honor, love, and the meaning of human existence. Yet the cost of this cultural and literary legacy is measured in countless individual tragedies: families destroyed, cities burned, lives cut short in their prime. The wives who lose husbands, the children who grow up without fathers, the elderly parents who bury their sons, all pay the price for Paris's decision to prioritize love over wisdom or power. This raises profound questions about whether any individual has the right to make choices that impose such costs on others, regardless of how personally meaningful those choices might be. The gods' involvement in both the original judgment and the subsequent war reveals the extent to which divine politics shape mortal affairs in ways that mortals cannot fully understand or control. Hera and Athena's lingering resentment over Paris's decision drives them to support the Greek side with supernatural assistance, while Aphrodite protects her chosen champions among the Trojans. The war becomes as much a contest between competing divine factions as a conflict between human armies. This divine involvement also highlights questions about fate and free will that run throughout Greek mythology. Was Paris genuinely free to choose differently, or were his decision and its consequences part of some larger cosmic plan that would have unfolded regardless of his personal preferences? The prophecies about his role in Troy's destruction suggest that his destiny was established before his birth, making the entire judgment scene an elaborate performance of predetermined events rather than a genuine moment of choice. The aftermath of the war demonstrates how the consequences of individual decisions continue to ripple outward long after the original choice is made. The surviving Trojans scatter across the Mediterranean, carrying their culture and stories to new lands where they influence the development of different civilizations. Aeneas's journey to Italy eventually leads to the founding of Rome, making Paris's decision an indirect cause of one of history's greatest empires. The Greek victors also face unexpected consequences from their triumph. Many struggle with the transition back to peaceful life after years of warfare, finding that their homelands have changed in their absence and that their families no longer recognize the hardened veterans who return. Agamemnon's murder by his wife Clytemnestra represents just one example of how the war's violence continues to claim victims long after the fighting ends. The story of the judgment of Paris ultimately serves as a meditation on the nature of choice itself and the impossibility of making decisions that affect only the person choosing. Every significant choice involves trade-offs and opportunity costs, and the consequences of our decisions inevitably extend beyond our personal sphere to influence the lives of others in ways we may never fully comprehend. Paris's decision also illuminates the tension between individual happiness and collective welfare that appears in many ethical systems. Should personal fulfillment take precedence over public duty? Is it morally acceptable to pursue love if that pursuit harms others? Can any individual justly impose costs on their community in pursuit of private satisfaction? These questions remain as relevant today as they were in ancient Troy. The enduring fascination with this mythological episode stems partly from its recognition that such impossible choices are an inescapable part of the human condition. Everyone faces moments when they must choose between competing goods, when pursuing one valuable goal requires sacrificing others, when the path to personal happiness conflicts with broader responsibilities. The tragedy of Paris lies not in making the wrong choice, but in facing a situation where any choice would have tragic consequences. As you reflect on this pivotal moment and its far-reaching implications, you begin to understand why ancient peoples saw in the judgment of Paris a fundamental truth about the human condition. We are all, in various ways, forced to serve as judges in beauty contests we did not request, making decisions based on incomplete information while facing pressures we cannot fully resist or understand. Our choices, like Paris's, ripple outward in ways that surprise us, creating consequences we never intended and cannot always control. The wisdom embedded in this ancient story suggests that while we cannot avoid making difficult choices, we can approach them with greater awareness of their potential consequences and deeper understanding of the values that should guide our decisions. Whether we choose power, wisdom, or love, we must accept responsibility for the results while recognizing that perfection in human choice, making may be impossible to achieve. Continuing your exploration of Aphrodite's multifaceted nature, you discover aspects of her divine identity that challenge and complicate the simplified modern understanding of her as merely a goddess of romantic love. The ancient world knew her as a far more complex and powerful deity, one whose influence extended into realms that might surprise contemporary observers who have reduced her to a Valentine's Day caricature of hearts and flowers. Born from the sea foam that formed around Uranus's severed genitals, Aphrodite maintains throughout her mythology a deep and abiding connection to the ocean that gave her birth. This maritime aspect of her nature manifests in worship practices, mythological stories, and religious epithets that reveal her as a goddess whose power extends far beyond bedrooms and marriage chambers into the dangerous and unpredictable realm of seafaring and naval warfare. You find yourself standing on the deck of an ancient merchant vessel, watching experienced sailors perform rituals dedicated to Aphrodite Urania, she of the good voyage. These weathered men, whose lives depend on reading wind patterns and ocean currents with supernatural accuracy, understand that the goddess who governs love also commands the forces that can either speed their ships safely home or dash them against rocky shores with equal facility. Before embarking on any significant journey, these sailors offer elaborate sacrifices to Aphrodite, seeking her blessing not for romantic success, but for calm seas, favorable winds, and protection from the storms that can destroy even the largest vessels in matters of minutes. They understand that the same divine power that can inspire overwhelming passion between lovers can also stir the waters into mountainous waves that overwhelm human attempts at navigation and control. The connection between love and the sea runs deeper than mere mythological coincidence, reflecting ancient recognition of fundamental similarities between these two powerful forces. Both love and the ocean appear calm and inviting on the surface while concealing dangerous currents and hidden depths that can prove fatal to the unprepared. Both can change mood rapidly, shifting from gentle tranquility to violent turbulence without warning. Both demand respect, skill, and a certain amount of luck from those who would navigate their treacherous waters successfully. Sailors develop an intimate understanding of these parallels through direct experience. They know that the sea, like love, rewards those who approach it with proper preparation, appropriate respect, and realistic expectations about its power to help or harm. They also understand that both forces can be unpredictable even for experts, that conditions can change faster than human reflexes can respond, and that survival often depends as much on divine favor as on human skill. The rituals performed for Aphrodite Urania reflect this understanding through their combination of practical seamanship and religious devotion. Sailors offer the goddess not just prayers and sacrifices, but also demonstrations of their own competence and preparation. They show her that they have properly maintained their ships, studied weather patterns, and acquired the skills necessary for safe navigation. This approach acknowledges that divine assistance works best when combined with human effort and expertise. The goddess responds to such devotion by providing the subtle environmental cues that experienced sailors learn to interpret as divine communication. A slight change in wind direction, an unusual cloud formation, or the behavior of seabirds can all serve as messages from Aphrodite about optimal sailing conditions, approaching weather changes, or hidden dangers that require course corrections. This maritime aspect of Aphrodite's nature also appears in her association with islands, particularly Cyprus, where she first came to shore after her birth from sea foam. Islands hold special significance in her mythology because they represent the marriage of sea and land, the places where her oceanic origins meet terrestrial civilization. Cyprus becomes not just her primary cult center, but also a symbol for the way that divine love bridges different realms of existence. The island setting proves particularly appropriate for a goddess whose nature encompasses both the wild unpredictability of natural forces and the civilizing influence of social relationships. Cyprus serves as a meeting place where diverse cultures interact and intermingle, where trade routes converge and different traditions find common ground. Aphrodite's presence transforms this geographical crossroads into a sacred space where the universal language of love transcends cultural and linguistic barriers. But perhaps even more surprising than her maritime connections is Aphrodite's association with warfare, an aspect of her divine nature that seems to contradict modern assumptions about the peaceful character of love goddesses. In several important cult centers, particularly in Sparta and other militaristic city-states, she was worshipped as Aphrodite Urania, the warlike, a goddess who brought unity, courage, and passionate devotion to warriors preparing for battle. This military aspect of Aphrodite's nature initially seems paradoxical, since warfare typically involves destruction, while love traditionally creates and nurtures. However, ancient peoples understood that the same emotional intensity that binds lovers together can also forge unbreakable bonds between warriors who must trust each other with their lives. The passion that drives romantic devotion can be channeled into fierce loyalty toward comrades, commanders, and the homeland that soldiers are sworn to defend. You witness this transformation as you observe a Spartan military unit preparing for battle under Aphrodite Urania's protection. These warriors, trained from childhood in the arts of combat and collective discipline, understand that individual skill means nothing without the group cohesion that allows them to fight as a single organism rather than a collection of separate fighters. They pray to the goddess not for victory through superior violence, but for the kind of mutual devotion that will prevent them from abandoning their comrades even when facing overwhelming odds. The erotic dimension of military bonding, acknowledged openly in ancient Greek culture, reflects recognition that the deepest human connections often involve elements of both emotional and physical attraction. The Sacred Band of Thebes, an elite military unit composed entirely of male lover pairs, demonstrated that romantic relationships could enhance rather than distract from military effectiveness. These soldiers fought with supernatural courage because each warrior was defending not just abstract concepts like honor or homeland, but the person he loved most in the world. Aphrodite Urania presides over this fusion of love and warfare, blessing unions that strengthen military units while ensuring that the violence of battle serves ultimately to protect rather than merely destroy. Under her influence, warriors fight not from hatred of their enemies, but from love of what they are defending, their families, their communities, their way of life, and most importantly, each other. The goddess also governs the passionate emotions that can make the difference between victory and defeat in closely matched conflicts. Armies inspired by genuine devotion to their cause fight with an intensity that purely professional soldiers cannot match. They endure hardships, accept risks, and make sacrifices that exceed rational calculation because they are motivated by feelings that transcend mere duty or economic interest. However, this warlike aspect of Aphrodite's nature comes with the same dangers that characterize all of her divine interventions. The passion that inspires heroic courage can also lead to reckless behavior that endangers entire military operations. Warriors driven by love-inspired fury may charge into situations that tactical wisdom would counsel avoiding, potentially winning glorious victories or suffering catastrophic defeats depending on circumstances beyond their control. The goddess's involvement in military affairs also creates the same moral complexities that appear in her romantic interventions. When both sides in a conflict invoke her blessing, whose prayers should she answer? How can a goddess of love justify supporting warfare that will inevitably result in death, suffering, and the destruction of communities? These questions trouble even ancient peoples, who develop various theological explanations for divine behavior that seems to contradict divine nature. Some resolve this apparent contradiction by arguing that Aphrodite's support for military action serves ultimately to protect love itself from forces that would destroy it. Warfare, from this perspective, becomes a necessary evil that defends the peaceful relationships and stable communities where love can flourish. The goddess supports violence only when it serves to preserve the conditions that make non-violent love possible. Others contend that the warlike aspect of Aphrodite simply reflects the recognition that love and conflict are intimately connected in ways that cannot be separated cleanly. The same emotional intensity that creates passionate devotion also generates fierce jealousy, protective anger, and willingness to fight for what one loves. The goddess embodies this entire spectrum of love-related emotions rather than only its gentle and peaceful manifestations. The worship of Aphrodite Urania also includes rituals that attempt to channel military passion in constructive directions, emphasizing unity and mutual protection rather than mere destruction of enemies. These ceremonies often involve symbolic marriages between warriors and their weapons, sacred oaths of mutual loyalty, and purification rituals designed to ensure that violence serves sacred rather than merely personal purposes. Such practices reflect sophisticated understanding of the psychological dimensions of combat and the ways that religious belief can influence military effectiveness. Warriors who view their weapons as sacred objects blessed by the goddess of love approach combat with different attitudes than those who see fighting as purely secular activity. They are more likely to use violence discriminately, to protect non-combatants, and to seek honorable resolution of conflicts rather than total destruction of enemies. The integration of Aphrodite's maritime and military aspects with her more familiar role as goddess of romantic love reveals the sophisticated theological thinking that characterized ancient Greek religion at its most developed levels. Rather than worshipping numerous specialized deities with narrowly defined functions, the Greeks recognized that divine power operates across multiple realms simultaneously, that the same cosmic forces manifest differently in various contexts while maintaining underlying unity. This holistic understanding of divine nature encourages worshippers to see connections between apparently separate aspects of their lives, to recognize that love, warfare, commerce, and navigation all involve similar psychological and spiritual challenges. The sailor learning to read ocean currents faces problems analogous to those of the lover learning to understand their partner's moods. The warrior developing trust in comrades employs skills similar to those needed for building intimate relationships. Aphrodite's multifaceted nature also reflects the ancient recognition that human beings are complex creatures whose needs cannot be satisfied through any single type of relationship or activity. The same person who seeks romantic fulfillment also requires adventure, challenge, community belonging, and meaningful work. A goddess who governs only one narrow aspect of human experience cannot provide the comprehensive divine support that mortals actually need. By expanding her influence to include maritime safety and military unity, Aphrodite becomes a more complete and useful deity, one whose worship can address the full range of human needs and aspirations. She transforms from a specialized love goddess into a comprehensive patron of human relationships in all their various forms: romantic, military, commercial, familial, and civic. This broader understanding of Aphrodite's divine nature provides important insights into the ways that love operates as a fundamental force in human civilization. Love is not merely a private emotion between individuals, but rather a social and political force that shapes communities, drives economic activity, motivates military service, and influences the rise and fall of nations. The goddess who embodies this force must be correspondingly complex and powerful. As you contemplate these various aspects of Aphrodite's divine nature, you begin to appreciate why ancient peoples developed such rich and multifaceted approaches to her worship. They understood that love, properly understood, encompasses far more than romantic attraction between individuals, extending into realms of loyalty, devotion, sacrifice, and collective action that determine the success or failure of entire civilizations. The goddess who governs such comprehensive love must be correspondingly sophisticated, possessing not just beauty and charm, but also wisdom, power, and the kind of complex understanding that can navigate the treacherous currents of both human emotion and political reality. Aphrodite emerges from this examination not as a frivolous deity concerned only with romantic pleasure, but as a fundamental cosmic force whose influence shapes every aspect of human existence. Now, honestly, which aspect of Aphrodite's nature do you find most surprising? For me, it has to be her role as a war goddess. The idea that the same divine power that inspires romantic love also forges military brotherhood challenges so many assumptions about the separation between love and conflict. This recognition of love's political and military dimensions leads naturally to consideration of how Aphrodite's divine nature was transformed and adapted when Greek culture encountered Roman civilization. The process by which the Greek goddess became the Roman Venus represents one of the most successful examples of cultural translation in ancient history, demonstrating how religious beliefs evolve to serve the needs of different societies while maintaining their essential power and appeal. When Roman armies first encountered Greek culture through their conquests in southern Italy and Sicily, they found a religious and mythological system that was both familiar and foreign. The Romans already possessed their own gods and goddesses, their own understanding of divine power and influence, but they also recognized the sophistication and appeal of Greek religious thought. Rather than simply rejecting foreign beliefs or replacing their own traditions entirely, they chose a more complex path of integration and adaptation. The transformation of Aphrodite into Venus began with the recognition of similarities between the Greek goddess and existing Roman deities, particularly an ancient Italian goddess of gardens and vegetation who shared some association with fertility and growth. However, this original Roman Venus was a relatively minor figure, concerned primarily with the success of agricultural endeavors rather than the grand cosmic forces that her Greek counterpart governed. The encounter with Greek culture dramatically expanded Venus's role and significance, as Roman theologians and political leaders recognized the political potential of adopting a goddess whose mythology included connections to the founding of great civilizations. Aphrodite's relationship with Aeneas, the Trojan hero who survived his city's destruction and eventually reached Italy, provided exactly the kind of divine pedigree that Romans sought to legitimize their growing empire and cultural ambitions. You witness this transformation taking place in the Roman Forum, where politicians and priests craft new narratives that connect their city's destiny to divine will and cosmic purpose. The story of Aeneas's journey from burning Troy to the hills of Latium becomes more than just an adventure tale. It transforms into a sacred history that explains Roman greatness as the fulfillment of divine prophecy rather than mere military conquest. Venus, in her new role as Venus Genetrix, Venus the Mother, becomes the divine ancestor of the Roman people through her son Aeneas. This genealogical connection serves multiple purposes simultaneously, providing religious justification for Roman expansion, cultural validation for Roman achievements, and political legitimacy for Roman leaders who claim descent from the goddess herself. The political implications of this divine ancestry prove particularly significant when ambitious Romans like Julius Caesar begin to exploit their alleged connection to Venus for personal advantage. Caesar, claiming descent from Aeneas through the Julian family line, commissions temples, coins, and public monuments that celebrate Venus as the patron goddess of his clan and, by extension, of his political career. This personal appropriation of divine favor represents a sophisticated form of political propaganda that goes far beyond simple ancestor worship. By identifying himself with Venus, Caesar associates his political success with cosmic forces that transcend mere human ambition. His victories in Gaul, his crossing of the Rubicon, his transformation from general to dictator, all become part of a divine plan that Venus has been orchestrating since the fall of Troy. The goddess herself undergoes significant changes during this process of political adoption. While retaining her essential nature as a deity of love and beauty, Venus acquires new responsibilities and characteristics that reflect Roman values and priorities. She becomes more maternal, more concerned with collective welfare and dynastic stability than with individual romantic fulfillment. She develops stronger connections to concepts of destiny, duty, and imperial mission that were central to Roman self-understanding. The famous statue of Venus Genetrix in Caesar's Forum captures this transformation perfectly, depicting the goddess not as the nude or semi-nude figure favored by Greek artists, but as a dignified matron whose divine beauty serves to enhance rather than overshadow her maternal authority. She wears flowing robes that suggest both divine majesty and mortal motherhood, embodying the synthesis of Greek aesthetic ideals with Roman moral values. Augustus, Caesar's heir and Rome's first emperor, continues and expands this political exploitation of Venus's mythology, commissioning the Aeneid from the poet Virgil as the definitive account of Roman origins and divine destiny. This epic poem transforms the story of Venus and Aeneas into the foundational myth of Roman civilization, comparable in cultural importance to Homer's works for the Greeks, but specifically tailored to serve Roman political and cultural needs. Virgil's Venus represents perhaps the most sophisticated development of the goddess's Roman incarnation, combining her traditional roles as deity of love and beauty with new functions as guide, protector, and prophetic voice of Roman imperial destiny. Throughout the Aeneid, she appears to her son Aeneas at crucial moments, providing divine assistance, strategic advice, and prophetic visions of the great civilization his descendants will create. The goddess's interventions in Virgil's epic consistently support themes of duty over desire, collective welfare over individual satisfaction, and long-term destiny over immediate gratification. When Aeneas becomes romantically involved with Dido, the Queen of Carthage, Venus eventually supports Jupiter's command that he abandon this relationship to continue his mission of founding a new Troy in Italy. This represents a significant departure from her Greek character, where she typically supported lovers' desires regardless of broader consequences. This Roman Venus also develops stronger connections to concepts of justice, law, and civilized order that reflect the empire's self-image as a force for peace and prosperity throughout the Mediterranean world. She becomes not just a goddess who inspires passionate love between individuals, but a divine power who fosters the kind of social cohesion and collective loyalty that makes stable government possible. The worship of Venus throughout the Roman Empire demonstrates how successfully this cultural translation was accomplished. Temples dedicated to the goddess appear from Britain to Egypt, each adapting her cult to local conditions while maintaining connection to the central Roman mythology. In some regions, she absorbs characteristics of local fertility goddesses. In others, she develops new associations with trade, prosperity, or military victory. The emperor cult that develops during the imperial period frequently incorporates Venus into its theological structure, presenting ruling emperors as her earthly representatives or adopted descendants. This creates a religious framework that supports imperial authority while maintaining connection to traditional Roman values and Greek cultural sophistication. However, this political appropriation of Venus also creates tensions and contradictions that become increasingly apparent as the empire develops. The goddess who originally represented passionate, individualistic love becomes associated with state authority and collective duty in ways that sometimes seem forced or artificial. The spontaneous, unpredictable nature that characterized Greek Aphrodite sits uncomfortably with the ordered, purposeful destiny that Roman Venus is supposed to embody. These tensions become particularly visible in Roman literature, where authors struggle to reconcile the goddess's traditional role as inspiration for romantic poetry with her new function as patron of imperial ideology. Poets like Ovid explore the contradictions between Venus's nature and her political role, often with subversive implications that challenge official mythology while remaining superficially loyal to imperial themes. The spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire creates additional complications for Venus worship, as Christian theologians attack pagan gods generally, while reserving particular hostility for deities associated with sexuality and physical pleasure. Venus becomes a favorite target for Christian polemics, which portray her worship as immoral and degrading, while ignoring her more sophisticated theological and political dimensions. Paradoxically, the Christian attack on Venus contributes to her cultural survival by forcing pagan intellectuals to develop more sophisticated defenses of her worship and mythology. Late Roman Neoplatonists create elaborate philosophical interpretations of Venus that present her as a symbol of cosmic love and divine beauty, arguments that influence Christian thought more than their creators might have expected. The final transformation of Venus occurs during the Renaissance, when Italian humanists rediscover classical mythology and begin to create new syntheses of pagan and Christian themes. Renaissance Venus becomes a complex symbol that can represent either sacred or profane love, depending on artistic and literary context, allowing creators to explore themes of beauty, desire, and transcendence within frameworks that remain nominally Christian. This Renaissance interpretation of Venus draws heavily on both her Greek origins as Aphrodite and her Roman development as a goddess of imperial destiny, creating a figure that embodies the period's attempts to integrate classical wisdom with contemporary values. Artists like Botticelli create images of Venus that suggest both earthly beauty and spiritual transcendence, reflecting the complex theological and philosophical currents of their time. The continuing influence of Venus in Western culture demonstrates the success of the Roman cultural translation that transformed a Greek goddess into a symbol of universal significance. Modern references to Venus in art, literature, and popular culture draw on this entire historical development, combining elements from different periods and contexts to create meanings that would be recognizable to neither ancient Greeks nor Romans, but which serve contemporary cultural needs. The story of Aphrodite's transformation into Venus illustrates several important principles about how religious and cultural beliefs evolve over time. First, it shows that successful cultural translation requires more than simple adoption of foreign elements. It involves creative adaptation that integrates new ideas with existing values and priorities. Second, it demonstrates how political power can reshape religious beliefs to serve governmental needs while maintaining enough connection to original meanings to preserve cultural authenticity. Third, it reveals that mythological figures can acquire new dimensions and significance as they encounter different historical contexts, becoming richer and more complex rather than simply losing their original character. The Roman Venus is not a diminished version of Greek Aphrodite, but rather an expanded and developed interpretation that serves different cultural functions while maintaining essential continuity. As you contemplate this remarkable transformation from Greek goddess to Roman imperial patron to Renaissance symbol to modern cultural icon, you begin to understand how mythological figures achieve lasting significance through their ability to speak to different generations about universal human experiences. Aphrodite Venus endures not because her original meaning remains fixed, but because each new culture finds ways to adapt her mythology to address their own questions about love, beauty, power, and meaning. The goddess who began as sea foam and divine passion becomes, through this process of cultural evolution, a symbol for the creative power that allows civilizations to transform foreign influences into sources of strength and inspiration. Her story demonstrates that cultural identity need not depend on isolation or rejection of outside influences, but can actually be enhanced through thoughtful integration of diverse traditions and ideas. In the end, the transformation of Aphrodite into Venus and her continuing evolution through subsequent periods of history reflects the same creative, transformative power that she herself represents in mythological narratives. Just as the goddess of love brings together separate individuals to create new relationships and new life, the cultural processes that shaped her worship bring together different traditions to create new forms of meaning and understanding that enrich human civilization. As you rest in the gentle embrace of night, surrounded by the wisdom and stories of this ancient goddess who has traveled such vast distances through time and culture, you can appreciate the profound truth that love itself in all its forms serves as the bridge between different worlds, different peoples, and different ways of understanding existence. Whether known as Aphrodite or Venus, whether worshipped in Greek temples or Roman forums, whether celebrated in ancient poetry or Renaissance painting, she reminds us that the fundamental human experiences of attraction, connection, and creative transformation remain constant, even as the forms they take continue to evolve. Sleep well, knowing that the goddess who once rose from sea foam to transform the ancient world continues to work her magic in every moment when hearts reach toward each other, when beauty inspires creation, and when love proves stronger than the forces that would divide and diminish us. In your dreams, may you find the same eternal wisdom that has guided lovers, artists, warriors, and dreamers for thousands of years. The knowledge that love, in all its magnificent complexity, remains the most powerful force for transformation and transcendence that our world has ever known. Sweet dreams, dear listener, and may Aphrodite's ancient blessing of love, beauty, and divine connection follow you into whatever adventures await in the realm of sleep and beyond. Good night.